Hello, so it's Michael here, and today I thought I would do another tutorial regarding setting up an interaction system. So I'm currently in the dialogue tutorial project that I've already done a tutorial for, so if you've not seen that, by all means go check it out, just because what I'm going to be doing is adding a bit more of a refined interaction system to that particular project. So for those that have watched it, you may remember that I set up a bit of a crude interaction system using a collision overlap to be able to interact with an NPC to that dialogue. But I thought it'd be a good idea for me to go through and actually show a bit more of a robust interaction system, how you could set one of those up, just to help make interacting within your projects a little bit easier and hopefully a little bit more consistent. So in terms of what it is that I'm going to be creating, it's probably going to use a few concepts that you might not be familiar with, one of which is inheritance. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So I'm going to open up the content browser, and inside the blueprint I'm going to go ahead and create a new blueprint class. And for the type I want to go ahead and choose actor component, so that's this one here. And I'm going to go ahead and call this one AC for actor component underscore interaction base. So this particular blueprint, it's not actually going to have that much in it. It's mainly going to be used for storing the variables, and the reason why is so that if anything else needs to get what the player is looking at, it can do so quite easily just by getting the interaction base that's on the character itself. Now the reason why we can do it this way is so that we can try and sort of separate bits of logic into childs of this particular blueprint. Hopefully it'll make more sense as we go on. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started essentially. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and create two variables, and these need to be of type actor. So in the list, so actor and then object reference. And that first one we will call that current hit actor, and then for the next one, it also needs to be an actor. I'm going to call this one prev hit actor, so that's previous hit actor. So the reason why we actually have two here, so the current hit is what the character is currently looking at, so what you want to interact with, and then the previous is what the last thing was that we're looking at. So the reason we actually store this is so if you have things like outline effects or something else that would indicate that the player can interact with it, without some text on the screen, we still have a reference to the previous one, so we can disable that particular effect. There might be other scenarios where getting the previous hit actor could be useful as well. The next thing we want to add is a bool, and this one's going to be called b recheck hit, and that's going to be a type of bool. In addition to that, I just want to go ahead and make that private. So what this particular bool will do, which we'll get to later, is when you interact with something, there might be scenarios where you kind of have to disable the interaction, if that makes sense. And as a part of that, that would kind of instigate all those visual aspects of it to be disabled, as well as some inputs, which we'll get to later. So this boolean just allows us to re-enable that when we need to, particularly once we've finished an interaction. If the current actor hasn't changed, then we can just re-enable the visuals quite easily. The next one we want to add is interact hold timer, and that needs to be a type float. Make sure I select the right one. And then the last one is going to be current hold duration. So these two specifically will be for detecting how long the assigned interact key has been held down for. So if you're wanting it where the player has to hold it down for half a second, then you can sort of denote that. If you want it to be instant, then you just set it to 0, but that sort of gives you that little bit of control that you can do there. And the reason why we have these in here is so that if you have any UI elements, they can get this particular value as these values as well, without having to worry about referencing everything else within the interaction system. Okay, so I'm just going to pop these in a few categories just to try and keep things a bit tidier. So I'll put those into one called hit, and then this one can just be interact. Okay. So with those done, we just want to go ahead and create a few quick functions just to help get some of this data and set some of it. So the first one I do is get current hit. So that's the first function, and then you just want to drag the current hit out. And then what I like to do is add a return node. And then from the current hit actor, what to do is valid, and you want to get the one with the F on it. So it should get this little node, and we just want to plug that into there. So that way, if you're not actually looking at anything that can be interacted with, that'll just return false. So if you're using this in other places, then you can obviously do those checks where needed to. And then just drag from the current hit actor and add that to the return node, and you should get an output on there as well. So let's quickly tidy up. And then the last thing I want to do on this is just click on the first sort of node in the chain, and then on the details panel, you just want to check the pure. So the reason why we do this, if we leave it unchecked and we drag it in, this is what the node looks like. But when we make it pure, it collapses it out. Collapses it down so it looks a little bit like it would do a variable. Okay, so the next one, so we want to do a very similar thing for the previous hit, so I'm just going to right click on that function and duplicate, and just call that one get prev, if I can type, prev, do previous hit, there we go. And then we just want to go ahead and change the previous hits, the current hit actor to the previous hit. And then on the output there, I just want to change that to, say, previous hit actor as well. And that should also already be pure because we've duplicated it. Just going to quickly drop these into a category as well, just to keep things tidy. I'm going to call that one trace, just because this is what's got on from the traces that we'll do shortly. So the next ones I want to add are get recheck hit. This one's going to be a little bit simpler, so we just want to return the recheck hit. The reason why we do need a getter is because it is a private variable. Now the reason why you would put something as private is just to prevent other blueprints from being able to sort of mod it directly, like using the set node, which isn't always desirable. So with that one done, we then need to do enable hit recheck, and this one we're just going to do put that in and set to true, and then do something similar. So I'm just going to duplicate it, and this is going to be disable hit recheck. And I just want to make sure that one's false. So in terms of these ones, I'm just going to put those into a category as well. Those hit recheck. Yet again, you don't have to put them in categories. I just like to try and keep things tidy. So in terms of the interaction base, that is it. Imagine some of you are probably getting a little bit confused now, so that doesn't really do anything. So now it's time to move on to the next bit. So you go back to your content browser, and you want to go to where the interaction base is, and then right click on it and create a child blueprint class. And this one, I'm going to call it AC underscore interaction underscore core. So this is actually where a lot of the stuff will happen regarding the sort of line traces that we'll use for this interaction system. It's in here that will actually populate those variables that we had in the base, these ones here. So If we go back to here, what we'll do first is go ahead and set up some more variables to start with. So the first one I want to do is can set previous. This is essentially used to check whether or not we can set the previous actor or not. That itself will make a bit more sense when we get to that section. The next one is going to be called update on tick. So with this particular interaction system, you can choose to have the line trace at specific intervals, or you can choose it to have run on tick. So depending on the sort of game that you're making, you might not always need it to run on tick. So it sort of gives you that sort of flexibility quite easily within this system to choose how it is that you want it to function. So in terms of the update on tick, we then do also need an update frequency. So this is essentially what would be used if update on tick is false. The next one we want is interact distance. So this is essentially sort of the distance the line trace is going to sort of travel in an attempt to hit something. For this particular one, I'm just going to go and start that off at 200, so that's 2 meters, and we'll see how that fares to start with. And then the last one we want to add is trigger delay. So this one also needs to be a bool, and that particular one will be used to prevent the interact function from re-triggering on the same tick, essentially. So we've got those variables sorted there, and now what we want to do is start assembling some of the things we need to actually perform the line traces that we need for the interaction system. Go ahead and create a new function. I'm going to call this one get trace locations. And for this particular one, the way that I want it to function is to go from the center of the camera. The reason why I wanted to do that is because it's a third person character I've got here. I suppose even if you've got a first person character, you'd probably want it tracing from the middle as well. But you do have sort of obviously flexibility there to change where the line trace starts to where it ends based on the logic that gets placed in here. The first thing I'm going to do is get the viewport size, like so, and then I'm just going to divide that by 2, like so, and then what we actually need to do is project that particular position, which is essentially in the center of the screen, and project that to a space in the 3D world. So it's kind of it's almost where the camera is located. Now you could quite easily just get the camera location, but the reason we're doing it this particular way is so that we don't have to directly reference anything within the character blueprint itself. And that just helps keep the interaction component that we're creating here sort of separate from other things. So in theory it's less likely to break in the future, or if you want to make tweaks and swap bits out, it's less likely to break, particularly like say if you change the cameras in your character or there's multiple cameras, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing trying so keep track and accommodate for that. So using the viewport and then projecting it, we're able to sort of help mitigate that. So the way we finish that off is we get the player controller, and then from here we want to deproject the screen to world, and then we can plug that into the screen position like so. So this particular node gives a few different outputs. So the world position is where in the world it believes the particular viewport is located, and then the world direction is kind of like the direction that the camera itself is facing, which will be useful in a second. So the next one I want to do is actually look at sort of finding the end position essentially. So the way that I want to do it in this particular case is actually do it based on the character location itself, so the actor location. Now the reason why I say that is because if I was to, let me just close these ones out. If I was going to the third person character, the camera itself is attached to a camera boom, and if I was to increase this camera boom, that's going to mean that in theory the interaction distance is going to have to be longer, and it's going to be a bit of a pain having to keep going back in and updating that. So what I'm going to do is kind of do it based on, so it's kind of going to get the distance from the viewport location, as it were, to the actor, and then it's going to add the line trace to that. So that way, if we change the size of the camera boom, then the line trace itself would sort of maintain so that position. So the way we can do that from here is we can do get owner. And what get owner does is it gets the owner, or the actual actor that this particular component is on. It is of an actor reference, which is perfectly fine, because the only thing we need is the actor location. Just like so. So we don't need to worry about doing any specific casts or anything like that to the third person character, because, as I said, the only thing we need is that actor location. And that just means that if we place this on any actor, it should still function without breaking, because it's not a specific character. So you can actually have multiple characters all using the same sort of interaction system. So with that done, we can get the actor location, and then I just want to go ahead and get the distance. So let's suppose get distance. There we go, distance vector. So I'm actually going to do it this way around, just because I want to pull that up there purely for organisation. And then once we've done that, we can then take that and add the interact distance that we have. So you can just drag it from here if you wanted to, or do a search for it. So again, so this is the one that we've created over here. So this is going to get the distance from the viewport world location, as it were, to the camera, plus that interaction distance. Once we've done that, we then actually need to multiply this distance by the world direction, so that's this one here, to actually get the the actual distance that's been travelled, if that makes any sense, based on that distance in terms of a world perspective. So this will itself will be sort of normalised in respect to the world, so it'll start at 0 and then it'll travel a given distance. With that done, we then actually need to add that to the initial start position, and that's how we then get the end. So with that done, we can then pull from there and do an add. Like so. And then the last thing to do is just drag in a return node, and then from here drag onto there, and then drag onto there. I'm just going to rename these, so that's start and that's end. So that's that just about done. So the last thing to do is just click on the main node, the first node, and convert that to a pure node. That just makes it so it looks like that, so you don't have to run an execution pin in it. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and create a new function, and this one's going to be called trace for interact. So this is the sort of function that's going to do a lot of the majority of the sort of checks, as it were, in terms of what's a valid interact and things like that. So the first thing we need to do is get a line trace by channel, and on the list you'll probably see two, so visibility or camera. So what we actually want to do is go ahead and create a new channel that we can use for tracing that's specific for interactions. So if you come up to the top and go to edit, and then you want to go to project settings, and once this is opened up, if you go to the collision section under the engine, you'll see there's object channels and then trace channels. So if you want to go ahead and add a new trace channel, and for this name I'm going to go ahead and call it interact. And by default, I'm actually going to set the default response to ignore. So the reason why we do this, so whenever you create a new actor or a new static mesh or anything like that, they're all going to have this channel on it. And really, we want to decide when something's interactable, not things be interactable by default. So by setting it to ignore, it means nothing by default is going to trigger on this particular channel, and then we ourselves will then choose, is this interactable or not, by change that particular channel, which we'll show in a second. So that's done. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to go into the NPC base that we have, and on the mesh, I want to go down to the collision, and you'll actually see that interact is listed there under the collision responses for the trace. So by default it'll be on character mesh, which is perfectly fine, but what we want to do is then change it to custom. Everything else that's in here should remain exactly the same, but what we can then do is for that interact, just change that to block. That means that this particular component will then block any line traces that are looking for that specific channel. So compile and save, and then we can close out of that. So going back to the core, interaction core, on the trace channel, might have to do a quick refresh. That interact option is now listed on there, so you're going to select it. So with that done, we can then drag in that get trace locations, and we'll just plug in the start and the end, just like so. So from here, we want to do a branch. So if we, from the return value, so this is essentially, has something been hit that meets that, that criteria for the channel trace. If it's true, we actually then want to do another branch. So yeah, we could, if we've hit something, we could just update that in the current hit actor. But the issue with that is, because this is going to be running potentially on every tick, we don't want to be constantly updating that value, especially if it hasn't changed. So what this particular check is going to do is check to see if that actor is the same or is different, and it'll do something accordingly. So from the on hit, if we drag from there and click break hit result, what we then want to do is from the hit actor, pull from there and do not equal, and then just collapse that out again. And then we actually want to get current hit actor, and that should be from the base. It should be the only one that's listed, but just to clarify, that's where that particular variable is. And then we can plug that into that second branch that we have. With that done, we can then say, okay, so if it's not the same as the current hit actor, what we want to do is actually set the current hit actor. So we want to grab that node in. You will have to search for it unless you have the show inherited variables, which will show in there. Drag them that way. Sometimes if you've got quite a lot, it can be a little bit confusing, but so you can just search for it. So we can drag up to there. Okay, so we're setting some reroute nodes just to keep things a bit tidier. Okay, so we've set the current hit actor, but another thing we will actually need to do as well is set the previously hit actor. There we go. So if we're going to update the current hit actor, we then need to make sure that we're actually updating the previous hit actor as well. So I'm just going to get a copy of the current hit actor and then set that to the previous. So we need to make sure that we actually do that before we've updated the current hit actor to the new one. So we're kind of like just passing it to a different variable before we update it. Once we've done that, we can then pull in the can set previous, and we want to make sure that's set to true. Okay, so this will be used if it doesn't hit anything, whether or not we can sort of set the previous to something or not. Okay, so the last thing we need to add on this particular line at the moment is the current hold duration. And we want to set that. So the current hold duration, we want to just reset to 0. Depending on how it is you're actually updating that, this itself might not have any effect. But generally, it's sort of, you know, for me, I think it's a good thing just having there just in case. Because generally, if you're looking at a new actor, you probably want that interaction timer to sort of reset. So the next thing we want to do is another branch. So this time I want to go from this false here. So this is whether or not the actor is the same as, well, the current actor is the same as the one that we're currently looking at. If it's not, we then want to see whether or not, so if it is the same actor, we then want to check, shall we do a recheck kind of thing. So we can get that to get recheck hit, which I've forgotten to make a pure node. So I'm just going to double click on that, open it up, and just convert that to a pure node. Okay, so back to the core blueprint. And then once we've done that, we just want to disable the hit recheck again. So if that's true, so if it's true, it goes through and then sets it to false again, just so it doesn't happen again the following sort of tick or interval. Now this little section here probably doesn't make much sense, doesn't seem like it does much, and you're right, on its own, it doesn't really do much. So what we actually need to do now is add something else. So what I'm going to do is create a new function, and this is going to be called update interact state. In terms of this particular function, that's it. We don't actually want to put anything into it. Now the reason why is because this function is actually going to be something that you will override in another child blueprint, which we'll get to shortly. But what we can do is just drag that in, and you want to connect it to the end of the current hold duration, and then at the end of the disable hit recheck. So it's up to you if you want to do two different ones or not, or put the same ones in. Oh. So there is actually one thing that this particular function does need, and that's an input. So if you go double click on that to open it up, and then with it selected on the details panel, just add a new input of type boolean, and I'm just going to call that hit. So, you know, as it hit something, or does it not hit something, that type of thing. Okay. So for this particular top row, that needs to be set to hit. So we've nearly finished. So the last thing we need to deal with is this particular false statement on here. So go ahead and grab another branch and connect that to there. So, and for this one, we want to drag in the reference for the can set previous. So the reason why we have that can set previous is because if it wasn't there, whenever we don't hit anything, it's going to be constantly trying to update like the previous actors and things like that, which we don't want to be constantly doing if we don't need to. So we only really need to be able to do it once, and that's when we've hit something new. With that done, what we want to do is actually just make a copy of the disable hit recheck and just connect that to the true. So if we're actually disabling a hit, so what we've setting the previous as it were, we don't need to check the current anymore because it would have technically it's changed. So it doesn't matter. With that done, we then need to do some more regarding setting the previous hit and the current hit. What we can do is get the current actor, current hit actor, shall I say. Like so, and then I want to do an is valid on this. So you get the one with the question mark, which will give you the execution pins for is valid and is not valid. So if the current hit is valid, we want to then go ahead and set the previous hit. Set previous hit actor. And if current hit actor isn't valid, then it won't set it. This just prevents you trying to set it to an invalid reference, essentially. Okay, so that's that done, and then once we've done that, so if that isn't valid, then we can actually just set the previous hit to nothing, which is perfectly fine. And then lastly, we want to set the current hit as well, and that needs to just be, again, empty because we've not hit anything. And then the set cam previous, we want to set that to false, so that just prevents it from going down this chain again until we've set it to something new. Again, we just want to add another current hold duration at the end, just so we set it to 0. And lastly, we want to add another one of these update interact states, but this time we want the hit to be false. So just a reminder, this particular function, the update interact state, that will be set up in another child blueprint.